Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the webinar that we're going to have here on a Friday afternoon. I think, at least what I know, is that most of Europe is sunny, so I hope that's not going to be a competing force as we are going to deep dive into some very, very important issues to talk about, both in terms of the developments on a technology front, but perhaps more so for the performance, efficiency, and quality of EU public services, because what we're going to talk about is the title Boosting Efficiency and Quality in EU Public Services, the need for a European multi-cloud first strategy. Some of you will recognize me from the past. My name is Frederick Eriksson. I am the founder and director of ECIPE, and I have the pleasure of moderating the webinar we're going to have this afternoon. And I am joined by a stellar panel of experts who are going to help us to inform on developments, both in terms on looking at the policy and perhaps economic side of things, but also practical experiences of how you actually can go about boosting efficiency and quality in EU public services when you adopt good strategies for it. We are going to start right away, and I'm going to introduce speakers as they are coming along. I want to highlight, before we start, two things. The first thing is that one of the speakers are unable to join us in person, and that's Michel Lorcheret from Sopra Steria. He has kindly sent us a video, which we are going to show you, which is a little bit more than 5 minutes long, but it's important, and he has some good experiences to share in it. So we are going to show that for you. So perhaps come as a little break between speakers, but bear with us on that one. It's a good one. The second thing I'd like to say is that the basis for the event that we are having now is also a report that we launched a few weeks ago, which was kindly supported by Oracle, Sopra Steria, and by Vodafone. And the lead author for the team that we had doing that particular paper was my director's colleague, Dr. Matthias Bauer, and he is very soon going to start the presentation of it. Let me just say that I did find the report myself to be quite revealing, both in terms of just understanding the potentials, perhaps also understanding a little bit where we come from, where we stand right now in terms of cloud adoption and the use of cloud services in public services. But when you look at the potential and how that can help to not just generate economic benefits, but also lots of other benefits, it is pretty staggering when you start to get into it. So that I found very exciting. And then, of course, also that it steps into a couple of issues which are, for some, a bit controversial when it comes to thinking about the balance between, on the one hand, efficiency, good structure, multi-cloud, and on the other hand, sovereignty perspectives. And we're going to have a chance to get into these issues during the conversation as well. But without much further ado, let me introduce you to Matthias Bauer, who is a senior economist and director at ECIPE, and he has been, as I said, leading the work on this report. So I'm going to leave the floor directed to you, Matthias. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much, Frederick, for the kind introduction, also leading us straight into the topic. Let me share with you my presentation. Okay, you should now be able to see my first slide. Right, super, that's great. So first of all, I also want to say good afternoon to everyone joining from Europe, and a very warm welcome also to those of you who are joining from overseas today. I want to keep myself rather short and straight delve into the major findings of our recent ECIPE study, which is about boosting efficiency and also quality in EU public services and the need for what we call an European multi-cloud first strategy. Before we did the study, we were basically thinking about several aspects that are very obvious in the cloud market in Europe. the prime originating observation was that cloud services are now being used pretty much everywhere across Europe's society at large, ranging from individuals, personal use cases, such as file storage, email communication, or creativity applications, to a very, very large spectrum of business use cases across pretty much every industry in Europe. But when it comes to ICT modernization, digitization of government use cases, the modernization of public services, many government organizations are less ambitious. And I think it is fair to say almost hesitant to transition legacy ICT hardware and software to the cloud. The second observation is that governments in Europe, but also outside Europe, to be fair, they are lacking because there is political inertia. Very often, I would say, political unwillingness to migrate ICT to the cloud, unwillingness often marked as data sovereignty or security concerns, even though these concerns are largely addressable nowadays through smart multi-cloud solutions. And the third observation, advanced cloud technologies are often cheaper and at the same time much more easy to administrate and maintain compared to legacy ICT hardware and software applications. And we aim to showcase the fiscal savings and also the monetary equivalence of productivity gains and efficiency enhancements in public services. And to state this right away, in our study, we find that a European multi-cloud first strategy could unlock approximately 450 billion in annual fiscal savings and productivity gains if governments were to transition about 50% of contemporary ICT to the cloud. I'll get back to this in a minute. Now, it is evident from many studies and use cases, case studies, statistical accounts, anecdotal evidence that businesses are using advanced cloud services solutions mainly for two reasons: to save money and to become more productive and innovative. So many businesses in Europe, they increasingly adopt cloud technologies to enhance flexibility, scalability, but also allow for innovation, especially in areas like general administration, operations, but also when it comes to data analytics and the automation of processes. About 50% of European enterprises are now using cloud solutions, especially when it comes to emailing and communication tools, file storage, data analysis, but also a wide range of office software technologies and applications such as customer relationship management and increasingly the use of AI tools. At the same time, even when we look in the private sector, cloud adoption and also the adoption of cloud-based AI often remains below potential. It is largely larger corporations, multinational corporations that are leading when it comes to utilizing advanced cloud technologies and utilizing advanced AI solutions. At the same time, when we look at the government sector, just a very, very small share of EU ICT spending is actually going into the cloud. This is what we take from some government papers, statistical accounts, which, however, are fragmented and often very intransparent as concerns the precise budgetary numbers regarding budget spent on cloud and cloud-based AI. But from what we take from these documents is that just a very, very small share of EU ICT spending is going to the cloud. Some governments are setting benchmark and lead in adoption, such as Finland, Denmark, Estonia. Many others are lacking and therefore also missing chances to modernize public services and cut costs. Why is public sector ICT modernization so urgent? Well, EU governments spend around 100 billion annually in public sector IT, much of which, however, is tied up in outdated, often fragmented legacy system. Fragmented not only between countries, but also inside countries, when you look at municipalities, regional governments, government agencies. And all that, of course, is limiting efficiency and also the use of flexible and innovative tools that are targeted or tailored to specific government use cases, ranging from general administration to niche sectors, such as, for example, aviation, air traffic management and control. And then there is government trust and government accountability. Without cloud-based modernization, public administration will continue to struggle to deliver responsive and also high-quality services, which is posing a risk to citizen trust and, considering cybersecurity aspects, often also a risk to data security. At the same time, there are many success stories across the EU and globally as concerns the use and deployment of advanced cloud services, including multi-cloud solutions. Healthcare in Italy. Italy has deployed a smart cloud infrastructure to enable nationwide access to patient to patient records, patient journals, for example, improving treatment, but also public health planning in general. Emergency services in Spain, regions such as Barcelona and Catalonia, they deployed emergency dispatch systems run through cloud infrastructure. And then there's tax administration. For example, in the Netherlands, the Dutch tax office leverages cloud technologies to automate tax processes, to improve account management and improve data management. And then a critical sector, defense. Defense in the United Kingdom. The UK's Ministry of Defense uses, for example, Oracle's sovereign cloud to run secure mission-critical operations while maintaining full data control. Now, when we look at the EU from a bird's eye perspective, we see that there is a fair level of variation as concerns private and public sector cloud adoption. Government as a platform, plotted here along the x-axis, enterprises buying cloud computing services plotted along the y-axis. And we see, for example, one country that is standing out, Denmark, a country that, if you look at it from a bird's eye perspective, is standing out in terms of private sector cloud adoption, but also government sector digitization and utilizing government as a platform services, including advanced cloud solution. So Denmark, for example, is having a clear strategic approach and integrated government strategy to facilitate digitization of government services. We have, for example, shared public services. We have digital identity systems in Denmark. We see a wide use of cloud solutions being encouraged. In Denmark, we have possibilities for digital payments, and above all, we have standardized frameworks for the digitalization of certain government services, plus standardized frameworks for public procurement in Denmark. Now, we not only see differences when it comes to actual cloud adoption across EU member states, but also differences when it comes to political considerations or concerns regarding legal and security aspects related to cloud infrastructure and the reliability and safety of cloud services. Some member states like France, Italy, and Spain, they emphasize what they call digital sovereignty, pushing for national or EU-based cloud solutions to reduce a perceived reliance from so-called non-EU services providers. Others, like Baltic countries, Nordic countries, they are much more open to cloud vendors whose headquarters is based outside the EU. At the same time, there is no single or commonly accepted notion as concerns sovereignty, digital sovereignty, or sovereign cloud. But we find some guidance in government documents, policy documents, and especially also from offerings made by cloud services providers, including the largest cloud services providers catering EU markets. And here, generally speaking, cloud infrastructure is infrastructure that meets, sovereign cloud infrastructure is cloud infrastructure that meets strict data protection requirements, residency requirements, data control requirements, and is often operated within national borders or by trusted EU entities, EU partners. The definitions, however, they can vary according to procurement preferences of ministries, government agencies, and so on and so forth. Now, in the EU and elsewhere, market participants responded to these demands with innovation. Their solutions now demonstrate that sovereignty does actually not require rigid, or let's say rigid nationalistic isolation. Multi-cloud strategies, they can actually achieve sovereignty goals and also help governments to continue to be able to access cutting-edge innovation when it comes to cloud services solutions, but also cloud-based AI solutions. Several US headquartered corporations, for example, they are now offering what they call sovereign multi-cloud environments in the EU, often, of course, in response to political concerns and legal requirements. Now, what is a multi-cloud strategy? When we look at the standard provided by the International Standards Organization in association with the International Electrotechnical Commission, IEC, a multi-cloud setup basically uses services from one or more, from two or more cloud services providers, combining different cloud services packages such as infrastructure as a services solution, platform as a service solution, and so on, relying on public cloud offerings, private cloud offerings, or sovereign cloud on the basis of the very definition that is applied by the purchasing entity. Now, what are the public sector benefits? Simply speaking, the same benefits as for private sector customers. Multi-cloud solutions basically reduce vendor lock-in risks. They enhance data sovereignty with regard to legal, but also technical sovereignty requirements, and they allow governments to be able to permanently select the best tools for each use case, including new functions, including new applications, and including new AI features. And the multi-cloud first strategy in that context basically means prioritizing flexible multi-cloud solutions by default in public sector ICT procurement, unless there's a compelling case for alternatives that can be made. Now, in addition to the use of cloud across public services use cases, we also looked into the deployment of artificial intelligence in government services use cases, and the potential impacts in terms of fiscal savings and productivity gains from using AI and automation in government functions. And here we point to the critical link between cloud on the one hand and AI on the other, access to AI technologies on the other. Why? Because AI generally needs powerful computing resources that traditional on-premise systems often, not always, but often lack. And cloud infrastructure is critical to run and scale AI effectively. And at the same time, most governments, including local governments and also government entities like government enforcement agencies, they are lacking internal resources that can build advanced AI in-house, which is why cloud services for them provide ready-to-use and actually fairly powerful AI tools, lowering their entry barriers and speeding up adoption across their use cases. Now, in fact, when we zoom out a little bit and look at member states' cloud readiness and AI readiness, we find that both are actually strongly correlated. Take Finland, for example. In Finland, Finland's digital government is relatively mature, benefiting from previous efforts towards digitization and the rollout of cloud across government services. At the same time, we see government strategies in place encouraging the utilization of AI tools, like strong governance framework, including an AI vision, ethical governments, but also a foundation that I would call public sector digital maturity that we are still lacking in many EU member states, first and foremost, Central and Eastern European countries. In our study, we also present several examples of how AI can be successfully deployed in public services in the EU, but also elsewhere. For example, for fraud detection, tax automation, but also when it comes to emergency services, for example, AI supporting real-time data integration in Spain's emergency response system. And a final large part of the study is actually our economic impact assessment, in which we aim to assess, first of all, the fiscal savings from transitioning traditional legacy ICT infrastructure to advanced cloud environments. And secondly, the monetary equivalent of productivity gains and efficiency enhancements across government functions. And we are looking into 3 scenarios. The baseline scenario, which is basically the EU and member states sticking to the status quo. The status quo being characterized by low to single-digit % spending on cloud and AI, governments continuing to run fragmented legacy ICT infrastructure, both hardware and software, and basically producing what I would call a lot of fiscal waste and inefficiency. And then we look into 2 additional scenarios. Scenario 2, our ambitious scenario, where we assume that 50% of the ICT used in eligible government services, and here we distinguish between critical and less critical government services, general administration considered less critical, defense, healthcare considered more critical. So 50% of ICT of eligible government services is being transitioned to the cloud. And our less ambitious scenario 2, part of 3, we only assume 25% of ICT is being transitioned to the cloud. And we distinguish between a long-term and a short-term scenario. Long-term referring to 6 years of implementation, short-term just 3 years of implementation. And in our most ambitious scenario, our findings point to 450 billion euros in annual fiscal savings after a transition period of 6 years, if 50% of ICT in eligible government functions are transitioned to the cloud. A relatively low part of that fiscal savings potential is stemming from the actual savings in the total cost of ownership. By far, the largest part of our economic benefits, if you like, is coming from productivity gains, from cloud-driven productivity effects, and first and foremost, from the productivity enhancements that can be achieved through AI utilization and automation of government tasks. And that's a big number, of course. We provide disaggregated numbers for each and every EU member state, and basically achieving benefits of this order would allow to spend much more money on other priority areas, such as human resource intensive branches of government like healthcare, education, or social care. Now, our conclusions, and that's my final slide for today. As you can take from the title, we are calling for a European multi-cloud first strategy, which entails an EU-led cloud procurement strategy, guidance, if you like. We are not calling for a centralized EU marketplace for cloud solutions or cloud vendors. But what we have in mind is, for example, having clear guidelines that allow governments to spend public funds, including EU funds, not only for capital expenditure in terms of ICT hardware, data centers, and so on and so forth, but also for subscription-based access to infrastructure, subscription-based access to software solutions. But also a centralized EU validation mechanism, validating cloud vendors that are compliant with certain legal requirements, such as the GDPR, the Data Act, DORA, etc., and security requirements. We are also calling for harmonized but non-discriminatory standards for cloud operators in the EU to ensure high security standards, which at the same time also support innovation and allow governments to choose the best services aligning with their use cases, and allow for equal participation of EU, but also non-EU cloud vendors. And we are calling for training and also cultural awareness initiatives where governments invest in skills and awareness to drive effective and at the same time secure cloud adoption across public institutions at all levels in Europe, and awareness that multi-cloud strategies are central to digital modernization and also access to AI tools nowadays, and that digital sovereignty is not in conflict with multi-cloud environments, and that even critical government use cases can actually benefit from powerful, advanced multi-cloud environments. I would leave it with that for now. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed, Matthias, for that presentation. And you will have seen that a link to the report is also available in the chat function. So an easy way to get access to the full and rich information in the entire paper is just to click on the link, and you have some reading to do together with your winding down drink for Friday afternoon after we've ended this webinar. Now we are going to go to the panelists, and as I started to say in the beginning, we are first going to listen to a short video, which is coming from Michel Locheret, who is the Deputy CEO of Sopra Steria in Benelux. He kindly sent us this video as he couldn't participate himself. So we are now going to leave to my colleague Gifre, who is going to put up the video so we can all listen to his insights, and we're also going to be able to see him.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Michel Lorgeret, Deputy CEO of Sopra Steria Benelux. Sopra Steria is a company made in Europe, working with more than 50,000 employees in and for Europe. So it is our pleasure to contribute to this important event on the future of digital public services in Europe. Here, alongside with our long-standing strategic partner Oracle, we support the launch of a timely and valuable report, boosting efficiency and quality in EU public services, the need for a European multi-cloud first strategy. At Sopra Steria, we strongly believe that advanced multi-cloud adoption is no longer optional. It is essential to build efficient, secure, and future-ready public services. And this report from ECIPE makes a compelling case that cloud adoption could generate up to 450 billion in annual savings and productivity gains across the European Union. That number alone demands attention and action. We endorse this report because it reflects key priorities that guide our work with governments across Europe. First, we are a trusted partner to public institutions from cities to national ministries and at the EU level. We serve highly sensitive domains. In the defense sector, we provide mission-critical systems across multiple countries, including the French Ministry of Defense. In border control, we contribute to securing the Schengen area, developing IT systems to the EU LISA agency. And in national research, we provide digital tools to INRIA, the French National Research Institutes. In this context, Sopra Steria delivers IT systems operating in various cloud environments, and in many of these domains, we work with Oracle technologies. This is the kind of strategic delivery experience that public authorities need when modernizing at scale. Second, with cloud transformation, we create new, highly skilled jobs in Europe, accelerated by market growth and the need for local infrastructure and regulatory compliances. The European cloud market is growing fast with an annual rate of 20%, which needs a skilled workforce to manage and innovate. Local data centers and European sovereign cloud offerings also create high-skilled jobs in Europe. And regulatory compliance and security requires dedicated knowledge and skills to implement and maintain cloud infrastructures. Third, we see cloud as a lever for efficiency, cost savings, and reinvestment. The ECIPE report outlines that cloud adoption can unlock up to 450 billion euros annually in fiscal savings and productivity gains for the EU. So solutions like our scalable and secure approach through multi-cloud, which incorporates Oracle Cloud technology, help governments to reduce IT costs, improving service delivery and time to market, and enables to redirect resources to healthcare and education. And at last but not least, to develop strategic autonomy with the right mix of technologies. Fourth, we believe that the future of public services will be AI-driven, ethical, and data-informed. Sopra Steria is committed to deploy responsible and sovereign AI that enhance transparency, decision-making, and citizen trust. Because sovereignty means choice, not dependency. Our multi-cloud strategy ensures clients stay in control of the AI initiatives. They stay in control of their data, their architecture, and their long-term digital future. Fifth, we cannot talk about transformation without talking sustainability. At Sopra Steria, we believe technology must serve people and the planet. Our corporate principles says it clearly. The world is how we shape it. So we endorse UN and EU objectives to get to net zero. We have reduced emissions from our operations for more than a decade already, and the efforts continues, so we are fully aligned with Oracle's ambition to achieve a carbon-neutral cloud infrastructure in Europe. Together, we help clients align with the EU Green Deal without compromising performance or sovereignty. And finally, a crucial point. Sopra Steria believes that digital sovereignty is achievable. We deliver sovereign cloud environments managed from and in Europe, fully compliant with GDPR, the proposed EUCS, and strict data residency requirements. This is why we value Oracle's support for multi-cloud interoperability, which reduces vendor locking, enhances flexibility, and empowers public authorities to act with confidence and independence. In closing, I would like to thank the ECIPE research team for such a well-timed and actionable report. We will share these findings with our clients, partners, and public stakeholders. Because today, the need for smarter, sovereign, and sustainable digital transformation is stronger than ever. Thank you for your attention.
All right, and we have to give a distant thank to Michel for sharing his thoughts with us. It's a very exciting company that he is the deputy CEO for in Benelux. Now we're going to go to the panelists that we actually have joining us here right now, which is Thibaut Kleiner, who is, as many of you will know, working for DG Connect at the European Commission, where he is the director for network content and communication networks for content and technologies. We also have Matt Allison, who works for Vodafone, where he works specifically on data platforms and AI. So that's in the group policy and public affairs divisions within Vodafone's. And last but certainly not least, we have our friend Antonio Freitas, who is the head of EMA Sovereign Cloud and Public Sector Center of Excellence at Oracle, who has also joined us in previous events. So why don't we move over to you, Thibaut, right away and listen to what you have to share with us. Very much welcome, Thibaut, and we look forward to your comments.
Thanks a lot, Frederick, and very happy to be with you. Indeed, I've recently taken the role of director in the Future Network, so covering cloud policy. So I think the study is very, very timely. And overall, I think that your message that we need to digitalize the public sector is certainly something that the Commission agrees with. I mean, in fact, if you followed our policies in the past years, we've published these targets for 2030 as part of what we call the Digital Compass. There are 4 areas in the compass, but one of them is the digitalization of the public sector. And we see this as a critical element for competitiveness, but also as very often the way to catalyze the benefits of the digital economy, and as a critical point also for SMEs to embark into this digital transformation. And in that context, you may have seen that a few days ago, we actually launched our overall strategy for this new commission in the digital area, which is to make Europe the AI continent. And this is where also cloud is so important, because in our plans, I mean, we want to make sure that we touch upon the key ingredients to enable this AI continent. This requires not only that we develop further the algorithm for AI, that we have the skills, that we have also generally the demand side, and we are planning very importantly an initiative on apply AI strategies to make sure that companies in the public and private sector really realize the benefits of artificial intelligence. But very importantly, we see cloud computing at the heart of this process. Without the cloud, you cannot really infer the large models to your needs. You cannot actually access very easily some of the AI solutions. They are most of the time requiring some computing power that is in the cloud. And therefore, you need to build the cloud and the data centers to empower the AI and to make sure that also the public sector accesses it. So I would very much, to that extent, support your overall message that the cloud is essential if we want to digitalize the public sector, but also that it is essential at the heart of this AI revolution that we are experiencing and supporting. At the same time, I think that you rightly point at some obstacles. You know, why is it that the public sector is not yet in Europe, in particular, engaging more with cloud solutions? I mean, I think the benefits seem compelling. Why is it not happening? And I think this is where probably we need still more evidence, more analysis to really somehow attack this issue. What we see in the Commission is that there are also market elements. You know, there are obstacles in terms of legacy solutions. I think it's not always easy to get rid of your legacy software, and to move to the cloud is also a substantial cost. I think this is something we need to also factor in and to evaluate. It's not immediate. You know, you switching in IT projects is very costly, and it's something that you need to overcome as well. We saw that through our efforts after the COVID pandemic, where the EU put a lot of money on the table to modernize also the public sector through our resilience and recovery facility. More than 130 billion euros have been invested overall in the EU in these digital technologies. A lot went to modernizing ministries, but a lot of this was faced with obstacles still in terms of how you go from one model to another. And I think that's something we need to investigate further. I think it's missing possibly in the study. We also see that there is a problem of trust towards cloud solutions. I mean, clearly, if you are a government agency, a government service, you don't want your data to get lost. You have a responsibility towards your citizens. And I think there is a special need for attention, how we make the data safer, how we make sure that there is also full understanding in terms of where it's going to be located. And there is also a problem of capture. I mean, that's what we see also in the cloud market. Switching is very difficult. And there is a fear potentially that the more you use the cloud, the more you actually being hostage almost to one type of provider. And I think this is where the multi-cloud concept could be interesting, because at least you have a kind of dual sourcing, but it's not that straightforward. And I think that's also what we bring through our elements. How do we get there is also we need to develop the right framework for adoption and for building this trust. So to conclude on this and to provide a little bit our policy approach, I would say that first, indeed, we want to create the conditions for adoption, for more cloud in the public sector. And there, in fact, I would argue that legislation is very useful. Again, it's an aspect that probably would have deserved more attention in the study. We have now a great opportunity in Europe with the Data Act. The Data Act is actually providing opportunities for switching providers. It makes it easier to port your data. And we are actually in the Commission working precisely on this right now to make sure that you can really change provider in cloud. This will, we believe, unlock a lot of interest from users, because they will not feel that they are necessarily hostage to one provider. They can still move, and therefore it can increase the market, as you're highlighting in your study. We also, in the Data Act, and I think that's also interesting, we are supporting, it's not called actually multi-cloud, it's called in parallel use of providers. So it's actually there, but it's maybe with a different name. But this is also something that the Data Act is supporting. It gives actually cloud users the tools and the options to take advantage of multi-cloud setup. And we believe that we have really a great opportunity now, I mean, through various articles to make it a reality. And I think this is on my agenda for the coming month, because in September, the Data Act will be fully in force. And generally speaking, we believe that this multi-cloud option has a lot of benefits to avoid lock-in, but at the same time, it requires also interoperability, because it's good to have maybe two providers, but if it's like having two very different silos, it will not bring the benefits and the synergy. So also there, you need to have a system where interoperability at the service layer is fully designed. And this is where, in our actions, we also believe that aspects around sovereignty and sovereign solutions is a must. In fact, as you may know, because we kickstarted with the AI Continent Action Plan, a public consultation, we are currently preparing an initiative on the Cloud and AI Development Act. One of the avenues of this will be to build more capacity for the cloud, but another one will be also to look at how the public sector can engage more and find opportunities for these sovereign solutions. That's something we need to design very well. We believe that unless we do this, there will be the barriers you highlight in your report, that there will be hesitations, that there will be problems of trust. So really, sovereign solutions, we believe, are needed, need to be also somehow made in Europe to a large extent, because this is also the key to create these positive ecosystems. And that's one of the questions we are asking in our public consultation. How do we develop these sovereign cloud solutions? What are the key conditions? What does it mean, a sovereign service? What are the elements that need to be brought together so that public sector will trust that they can move to the cloud and not just remain in their outdated solutions? So in short, I think it's a very exciting time because as we see overall, especially in Europe, some governments have budgetary issues. I think that all of them are looking at digitalization as a source of savings. And I think that your numbers in the study are very interesting, very compelling. There's a lot of opportunity to make the public sector more efficient. And I think we should embrace this through the cloud, but not only. I think that it would be probably naive to believe that this is just a magic bullet. There are a series of elements that you need to add to convince public sector to go to the cloud. One of them is on skills as well, but one of them is on developing this offer in terms of sovereign services, interoperability, and making sure that you facilitate switching as well as multi-cloud operations. So in short, from my side, really a lot of encouragement. I think this is a very timely report and something we would like very much to integrate in our policy, in our thinking for the future Cloud and AI Development Act. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thibault, and thank you very much for some very, very good points and also for raising some of the issues that we certainly should come into and discuss. Matt, let me turn over to you right away and hear your contributions and to the extent you want to already sort of follow up with some other complementary points, feel free to do so.
Thank you, Frederic, and I'll try and avoid too much repetition, but I think inevitably there will be some because we are in, I think, very strong agreement with the comments that have been made so far. So excuse me if there is some repetition, but I'll also do my best to be a bit contrary and find some areas in the report that I think we could go further. Firstly, just briefly to introduce Vodafone and our stake in the discussion, if you like. We're probably well known to people on the panel and attendees, but just for awareness, we're a global connectivity and digital services provider. And we are indeed a provider of trusted services to European clients in both the public and the private sector. We are fully subscribed to the recommendations of both the letter and the Draghi report. The Europe has an opportunity, but also an existential need to fully realize the scale of the European single market and to undertake efforts to deepen the single market, and to embrace the opportunity of digitization to deliver the efficiency savings, the cost savings, and the transformation, which is outlined in this report. And as a first reflection, it's really welcome that you have a headline-grabbing figure to demonstrate what the potential benefits are. But I think we also need to reflect on the opportunity cost if we don't realize that vision. And that is something I think which comes across very strongly in the report, that there is, in fact, an existential moment here for European public institutions to adapt and fully embrace the opportunities and the benefits of technology. So I thought I'd just prepare a few reflections, the things that we like about the report, that we support in the report, and then some kind of avenues and areas for further inquiry. So firstly, in terms of the report's recommendations, as I say, what comes across most strongly here is the accuracy and the urgency with which it presents the challenges that we face. And in particular, looking at the points around having a European approach to public procurement that properly embraces the scale of the single market. This is something which is very much in line with our vision, that we need to realize and have a true single market, something which we think we lack today in the field of telecoms. And it's only through those actions that you're able to pull resources, to realize efficiencies. And we think that harmonization is something which is urgently needed at this moment. The second point around in the report that we're very much aligned with is the approach to sovereignty, the open and non-discriminatory approach to technology sovereignty, which I think is very much embedded in this report. This follows on from one of the aspects of the Draghi report that we think is really timely and really prescient, which is the pragmatism kind of written into the approach to technology procurement and service delivery. And in particular, the recommendation that we should have practical solutions over symbolic exclusions. And this speaks very much to the work that Vodafone has been doing over the past 3+ years now in the arena of cloud sovereignty, where I would say we've been holding the line in relation to the ENISA scheme certification for cloud services, EUCS. And we've been resisting efforts to have included within that scheme what we see as exclusionary and unworkable requirements, which are motivated more by symbolism rather than practical security and resilience. So for us, that's something that we heartily embrace and endorse within the report. So from our perspective, it's crucial that efforts to boost cloud sovereignty are grounded firstly in reality, and that is a recognition that we cannot and we should not seek to build everything from scratch, but also on practical steps that companies can take to guarantee security, the resilience of the service, integrity of data, rather than unworkable requirements. And I'd refer in particular there to discussions around, for example, achieving full immunity to third country laws, which is something that we think is a little bit of an illusory and, as I say, practically unworkable requirement. And at heart, an openness. And we talk about strategically open technology sovereignty. We produced a report of our own 3 years ago now with Capgemini, identifying some of the economic cost modeling around that. But being strategically open, both to aligned countries and trusted technology providers. And that being something which is really central to the numbers that are included in this report. In terms of areas where we think the report could go further, actually, I think it tends to take adoption in the private sector for granted somewhat. We sort of speak of that being something which is boxed off and we now need to look at the public sector. But the Commission's own figures don't quite bear that out, actually, and really indicate that we have a long way to go in terms of adoption and deployment of cloud technology, in particular of edge nodes, but also in the AI continent communication, which came out recently. The statistic, and correct me if I'm wrong, Tibo, but only 13.5% businesses identified in that report as adopting AI technology. So we can't take for granted that the private sector has this actually sorted already. We also need to ensure that we address that hand in hand with public sector adoption. And then looking at the barriers, the political barriers to cloud adoption, and doing more to really get behind that and understand why those barriers exist, which I think is referenced, but we could do more to understand, for example, the budgetary constraints that all European countries find themselves in at the moment, and how we can find a way to carve out capex, dedicated funding for digital infrastructure projects. Public attitudes towards cloud and AI technology is being something which actually democratic governments, they are instructed to and beholden to their citizens. And if you don't have that buy-in at the public level to allow for example, data in relation to welfare or social security or health services to be pooled, to be aggregated, to be analysed, if you don't have that buy-in, governments are really limited actually in how far and how fast they can go. So is there more that could be done there around public awareness, but also, Thibaut, as you mentioned, putting in place really clear guidelines through legislation which allow for that confidence and then adoption to flow. Also inertia, always being a blocker, but the potential incumbent technology providers and making sure that they're fully onboarded, if you like, with an open and multi-cloud vision. And then finally, addressing harmful misconceptions around sovereignty, which we think are delaying actually the adoption of cloud technology. And just reflecting on what we've seen in this presentation, Matthias, I thought it was interesting that in your graphic of public and private cloud use, the cluster at the bottom with both, and I think, again, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but France and Spain being at the lower end when it came to private and public cloud adoption in that graphic, being some of the strongest proponents of what we see as exclusionary requirements within EUCS. I don't think that's a coincidence. And I think there is a prevailing attitude towards the use of cloud services, which is holding us back, actually. So just a few kind of suggestions for maybe further study. But I mean, in closing, Vodafone wants to be a partner in driving the change and digital adoption. We want to be a trusted provider of services in both the public and the private sector across the EU. But we think that's predicated on two things, which are really identified in the report. Having an open and competitive market for cloud services, so that other players can both procure and integrate the solutions of technology providers into their own systems, but also compete on their own terms without fear of anti-competitive commercial practices. And secondly, a strategically open approach to European technology sovereignty that allows trusted vendors and aligned countries to fully participate in European supply chains. So I'll stop there, but happy to participate in any follow-up questions. And thank you again for the opportunity.
Well, thank you so much, Matt. That was some really, really good points. And we are certainly going to come back to what you also spoke about there towards the end. But first, Antonio, over to you and ask you to reflect on not just the report, but perhaps also what we have heard so far in the discussion.
Well, thank you for having me. And it's a pleasure for us to contribute to this report and help Europe move forward. As we always do with these events, and Thibaut, we have not met before, but the rest of the parties we've been together, I've been with your team. What I try to bring is the view from the ground, right? What we are seeing, where we are interacting, and a lot of my work is actually interacting with the European governments, with government agencies, with the Commission itself. In the end, just a word on Oracle and why we are on this study, right? I think it's important to realize that Oracle, as a technology provider, a global technology provider, started as a company from providing technology to the most critical use cases you can think in the life of a society or of a government. Secret agencies, tax collection, and Oracle, having come to cloud, comes from a fundamentally different background from many other players in this market, where we today know that we are a fundamental part of the life of Europeans across so many dimensions. As I said, from tax collections, where full countries run their full tax service on Oracle technologies, or countries that run the definition of social benefits or the distribution of social benefits on Oracle technologies, to defense ministries and the armed forces that rely on Oracle technologies for defense planning and execution, to energy grids, to banking. We came from there, and Oracle, being known that came late to cloud, we look at cloud in a very pragmatic way. And when we start looking at the adoption in the public sector, to some of the comments made, let me for a moment put in the shoes of all the stakeholders I met across public administration and talk a little bit about the challenges I've heard in meetings myself. And one of the things that a lot of them really talk about is, hey, look at me, I'm a public servant. I need to defend the interests of my people. If I am putting a critical government function on which the society depends on a platform, I have the obligation to have some control over that platform. For me, this is not a philosophical discussion. For me, it's a natural evolution of technology. As cloud technologies have evolved, and today provide advanced capabilities, and I always talk to that enable with less time, with less clicks, provide more advanced logic that improves the experience of users, of citizens, of the workers of the administration. Every government in the world is experimenting with public cloud. Now, the challenge as the market evolves, as we see more critical use cases going to the cloud, is just natural that the other question comes around on how much control can we put on cloud. So I don't see this as a challenge. I think see this as an evolutionary step that will force the industry to take one step further. Oracle, from that point of view, understands that. And I need to say, we've built a European cloud, physically fenced in Europe, run by Europeans, not by our own creativity, because 3 years ago, we did the roadshow with our executives across the European Commission, many member countries, that told us how they saw the evolution of cloud adoption to look like and the participation in international players. So I think we need to balance all of these things that we see in the ground towards building solutions that enable global innovation, because we talk about technological sovereignty. I will say, if the best developer in the world is somewhere in Tanzania, I want him to work for me because I want to sell that globally. So where do I see the biggest challenges from the public sector? One, budget fragmentations. If you go to governments, There's a level of autonomy to ministries, and inside ministries to departments and participated entries. We are in a situation across Europe, and I see Middle East and Africa as well within my responsibilities, where I will allow me to make a very stupid example, but it's like we need to transport 40 tons of raw materials from one place to the other across all of these administration entities. But as none of them has the money to buy a truck, all of them are buying a small Fiat 600 that is an amazing car. 40 or 80 Fiat 600 will cost a lot more than a 40-ton truck and will never be as efficient to transport that workload. If I need to do that transportation once, I'm buying an asset that has a certain lifetime to use it once. For me, this is the basic analogy to the challenge of budget within the European Union. So I understand certain countries, for example, have laws that enforce autonomy of ministries. Think, for example, you cannot use my tax data my foreign data if I'm in a foreign country to then see whether I'm tax liable or not. So in the defense of interest of citizens. But does that mean that we all need to go and buy a Mini? Can we evolve that legislation to say, yes, you need to be in control of your data, but you can be on a common platform. Maybe we can procure that platform together. So I'm talking about governments, not take this to local governments or to municipalities. Okay. The second thing I see is really about skills. Let me go then to the other extreme of municipalities. Think of a small municipality anywhere in Europe, okay? And they need to keep up with all the procurement rules and evolution of technology and make choices that for the servant, and we know a public servant, if they make a certain decision that is not lawful, he is personally liable. So put yourself in the shoes of the servant. How can we make the life of the servant easier? Because you will not have the massive departments that, again, a large global bank has to both analyze all the legislation that is coming out and all the technology evolutions that are moving forward. They know very well the technology they have under their desk, that little server they bought 30 years ago, but they sometimes don't understand cloud. So could the Commission play a bigger role, and Europe overall, on defining rules and providing certainty to these entities on how and what they can choose? That's a big part that sometimes we forget. It goes back to the fragmentation, right? Then I look at the regulation. We still have European regulations, national regulations, local regulations, sector regulations. I can tell you I owned a small business in the space of healthcare some years ago. And little things like I never had an idea that because I had an X-ray machine, and I'll tell this as a joke for you to understand the position of these little entities. Because I had an X-ray machine, small X-ray machine, and I was in the influence area of an airbase, the Air Force needed to approve my project for an X-ray machine that produces less radiation than a mobile phone. And it took me almost 8 years to get that license. So I was illegal and liable for 8 years. If the regulator wanted to fine me, they could, but I could not get that project together. It was a dental clinic, for Christ's sake. This level of absurd happens as well with a small municipality or with a department within a ministry. And sometimes, again, we talk about legislation, all these things in abstract and all these things, and we need to understand the reality of these people. And finally, I will go back to coverage. I'm fortunate to say that the founder of the company that employs me today said a year ago, in the future, every country will want to have a sovereign cloud. It's his words, and I can subscribe. So if we put cloud as a scale platform that provides advanced technologies and constant innovation, and for me, cloud is not just virtual machines. It's around advanced PaaS and SaaS capabilities. It's around software development. Can cloud evolve towards deploying software at that scale, but ensure control at the local level? Oracle is doing that. We are in part, again, the EU Sovereign Cloud we launched is an example. We are partnering with governments to help them build their national sovereign clouds where they have operational control. But couldn't Europe also help standardize these rules? Again, and I heard this from some of the Commission people, we want global providers to be here for indirect investments, but to provide technology in Europe on European rules. We're taking that step. I will say again, and I said it's in different events, what I still struggle as a provider that is committed to critical use cases, understanding these aspects I just illustrated, that the rules become simpler and standard to my buyers so they can have a more, let's say, educated discussion with me, because right now the discussions are mostly driven by fear and ignorance. And I always say the best remedy for fear and ignorance, For me, it's a risk-based approach, and I'll finish with that, Frederick. Basics of risk management, sometimes in the policy circles, they are not well understood, but in technology, the first class in risk management, you learn these very basic things. You build a risk catalog. What are the things you are afraid of? Write them all. Then you score them on probability and the impact of them happening. Then you see, can I accept this risk or not? And if not, what are the contingencies? Not all these buyers across governments, municipalities, have these skills and this ability. Could we, as a commission, as the industry, as the think tanks that ECIPE are doing such a good work for, provide a framework of risks that would help these entities provide, okay, I am exposed to these risks, I need this contingency, so this is a viable solution for me. For me, that would make me a lot easier, the discussions of saying, what is the right solution for you?
Thank you very much, Antonio. And let me actually pick up on that point right away and perhaps ask you and also Thibault to come in and just reflect on this a little bit, because it's also a question that I have received from audience here, which is around the concept of sovereignty and what we mean by it. And the question is it a static term, or is it a term which is exposed to change as technology change? We have, I think, now a lot of different providers who will provide a sovereign cloud. And when I speak to public service people who are involved in technology development, ICT developments, their own cloud, AI strategies, the things I heard a few years ago was very much around data integrity, making sure that GDPR is going to be followed, that we're not exposed to different privacy risks, which were outside the territory where the cloud was sort of stored, or where it was localized territorially. But now we are moving into different issues. We're talking about defense. We're talking about changing geopolitical frameworks. We're talking about world developments that I suppose also leads us to have a somewhat different conceptualization of what do we mean by sovereignty. So what do we mean by sovereignty? When we say use these terms today, what do we mean? If I start with you, Antonio, and then move over to Thibault.
I love that question, because that is one of the questions I've been asked to answer in so many of the workshops I'm doing with governments all across Europe and beyond. And I put this, honestly, instead of inventing, I'm using some of the analysts that are out there in the ICT world and their views, and they are defining sovereignty in fundamentally 3 dimensions. The data sovereignty, for me, it's yesterday's conversation. Today, there are multiple ways to control access to your data through encryption and all of that. We have a strong partnership with Thales that is undisputedly probably one of the global leaders in encryption technologies. And if you know their technologies, it's very clear how much control you have on that data. But the next level where things are discussed, going back to that evolutionary journey of adoption of technologies, if I'm putting more critical the functions of the economy, of the society, of governments, in any kind of platform, call it whatever you want, I think it's just fair that the next level is what kind of operational control I have over that platform. So that's the next level that I'm seeing it, okay? I would put a third level that is around the technological sovereignty, that is the ownership of the technology and the intellectual property. And I would put a fourth one, that is the legal certainty. Let me talk a little bit about this. For my view, personally, the technological sovereignty, I think Europe must ambition to have a bigger footprint globally. I think there are multiple reasons. I go back to Matthew's comment. I loved reading the Draghi report, and I read it all very carefully, because as we spoke very often in our after hours when we do these things in person, it just wrote what we all spoke behind the scenes on our cocktails after these events. So I think Mr. Draghi and the team really did a very good assessment of what are the barriers for innovation in Europe across financial dimensions, financial markets, access to capital, regulation. I will say nothing there. My view is that innovation is global, and all global companies, being European or wherever they were born in the world, today they operate globally because they need to leverage those innovations where they are and distribute them at a global scale. So for me, of course, for example, we are partnering with Thales because they are the best. I want more European bests in other areas, and I think the Commission, rightly so, needs to create the conditions for that to happen. Does that mean that I will not work with anyone else? I think that's the part. We need to understand that technology, again, innovation will come wherever it comes from. So creating boundaries or limitations that, oh, if your technology is that color, I don't want it, I think will limit Europe's access to innovation, will not help us at all. I'm with Matthew on that one. So when I go and discuss with governments, I take as a given that absolute technological sovereignty is a utopia. But I think what is really important is operational sovereignty. Okay, once the technology is deployed, can I ensure full control over that technology? And that's, Frederic, as you mentioned, defense is one of the works we're doing with defense. And I can mention here, because it's not mine, the announcement, the collaboration we're doing with the Polish government, where the Polish government just made a press release announcing a strategic collaboration with Oracle to provide cloud services to the Ministry of Defense and the cyber unit around defense intelligence, where the whole discussion is ensuring that the Polish armed forces are in full operational control of the platform and the technology we are providing them, which they cannot afford. Think the scenario of a war in the middle of a fight, that someone else from somewhere can go click a button and throw the platform that controls everything down. It's unacceptable. The same way that applies in defense, applies in healthcare, applies in financial services, tax collection, benefits distribution, okay? And then is the legal certainty. And we have all these discussions that I try to go into because I'm not a lawyer of jurisdiction. I can only say this, I have a very close family member doing law school right now at the age of 50 and studying international law. And there's a basic principle that says that the law that applies is the law of where you are in. So if you are in Europe and you are a European resident and you have a European permit, the law that applies to you first is the European one, period. Nobody in Europe should break the law because they will be fined according to European law. So if there's a conflict of laws, that's why courts are there. But you need to follow the judicial pace. So getting the technology discussion entangled with legal discussions that for me are more proper for a judge is just trashing it and putting that in as I said, philosophical discussions doesn't help. So for me, data sovereignty absolute. You need to be in control of your data. It's non-negotiable, period. Operational sovereignty is where I see the battle being fought right now. And I think regulation, Thibault, as an important aspect to clarify that. If you are providing critical services, if it was me, Antonio, in my business, or if I was an official, I would not want a critical service for my company or my country to be in conditions where I don't have a certain level of control, okay? Then the technological sovereignty, I think we need to drive European collaboration, but we need to be open to global innovation, as we do in so many industries. A lot of European industry has components that come from everywhere in the world. That's why we go global supply chains. And the final, we need legal certainty. And for that, I think Thibault, your department specifically has a fundamental role. I've been glad to collaborate with your team in the past. We look forward to very clear rules that really make the life of that guy, that poor guy in the municipality that is buying, simple and transparent.
Very good. Let me turn to you, Thibault, and then also to Matt and Matthias to reflect on the same issues.
I mean, I think Antonio was providing a lot of very, very good elements, and I subscribe by and large to what he said. I should also say that this issue of definition of sovereign services, sovereign cloud, is something that is really also at the heart of our current public consultations. I also think that we are at the moment listening to good ideas, because it has to be also put in legal terms in a way that is convincing and practical enough. I think that's very relevant what Antonio was saying. What I can say is that we see this from two angles. First, there is the issue of the demand side, so to say. So what are the areas of government or public sector that have specificities in terms of, you know, their criticality or the security they imply and so on, that require this special attention? I think this is one area that may be evolving, but where certainly you can define also the, a series of services that you expect to fall in this sovereign dimension for governments. And then you have on the other side, the providers that need to meet certain criteria so that they can really respond to the requirements of these, sovereign services. And that's where certainly, data, but also jurisdiction is extremely important. It cannot be that you are, as a government, in a situation where your cloud provider is subject to inquiries from China or from the United States. I think that doesn't work simply, and that's the kind of things that we will now scrutinize through our public consultation. But I think that overall, it is to be welcome that we try to address these issues, because I think that unless we do that, there will not be an uptake of cloud to the extent that we should see. And I think that to me, that's also a positive element. The more we can explain that the environment whereby you move to the cloud is properly framed, the more I would say governments and public sector operators will embrace it.
Very good, thank you. Matt, over to you. I mean, you spoke about when you sort of reflected on this issues initially about sort of a bit of a conflict here between sometimes more symbolic statements that are being made and, on the other hand, practical solutions to try to deal with the specifics that anyone will be confronted with if they are planning to go more to the cloud and think about their, to use that term, their sort of operational resilience and the protective capacities there. So how do you reflect more on this issue between, on the one hand, perhaps then a multi-cloud strategy versus sovereignty? Is there a conflict there?
I don't think the two should be mutually exclusive. I think that comes out very strongly from the report. And the question that you put to the panelists here, it seems to be the holy grail, right? I mean, everybody's searching and looking for a clear, concise definition of technology sovereignty, and companies are putting their views across. The Commission is in listening mode. I'm aware the European Parliament, as well, is also working on an own initiative resolution, which will give their impression of what technology sovereignty is. From our perspective, two things to say. Firstly, we asked this question 3 years ago as part of our report with Capgemini, and we surveyed a wide variety of customers looking to procure cloud solutions and said, well, what do you think sovereignty means, and what do you look for in a sovereign solution? And the number one response that came back, Antonio, was exactly what you said. It is control. It is control over my resources, my data, my services, and the ability to do what I want with them. And if that means that I port them to another service provider, if I'm able to extrapolate with different cloud providers, that is the main sort of point that came back. There were other concerns. And I would say that, concerns over territoriality, extraterritoriality, application of law, it was in the list, but it wasn't the first or the second order priority. And that kind of then, I think, conditions how we approach the topic. From our perspective, we're really trying to crystallize our thinking on this. We are very invested in having an approach to technology sovereignty which allows us to participate and allows us to be a trusted vendor, a trusted supplier. It's no secret we are a British headquartered company with markets across Europe, and there is an escalating trade war at the moment between the EU, the US, and all these pieces are in flux, and we're looking for something that is stable, that is predictable, and that is open to our participation. I mean, we understand this, I think, most basically is the ability for, let's say, nation states, but also organizations individually, to act independently in support and in defense of their interests and their values, and in the ability to also ensure that their rules, their regulations are applied, are respected, and are abided by. What it doesn't mean is that we live in, I mean, you use the word utopia, maybe you could also say a dystopia or some fantastical scenario where no other laws apply and there are no other sovereign states with their own laws that apply, because it is an impossibility. And we have to recognize that we live in an interdependent world, and a world where we have globalized digital technology, supply chains, and trade in goods and services underpinned by data flows. That is a fundamental reality, and we can't unplug ourselves from that, and nor would we want to if we're going to achieve the benefits of the report. So it's recognizing what it isn't, and then trying to push towards something that it is. And we think that is, essentially, it boils down to the ability to act in defense of one's interest, and that point around control that you really laboured, Antonio.
Many thanks, Matt. You may be a British headquarter company, but I usually brag about my own history, which is that I once worked for a Swedish entrepreneur called Jan Stenbeck, who also was one of the founders of Vodafone when back at the time when it was a Swedish company. So, and being a Swede myself, I think of it as that. Matthias, over to you, and I'm afraid you're also going to have the final words in this discussion that we're going to have as we are getting close to our end. Matthias.
Yeah, a lot has been said. Thank you very much, Frederick. I can also subscribe to what's been said by others before. Generally, we take a cloud agnostic approach in our study. So we take the numbers, the statistics that are publicly available at large, and we are agnostic to, let's say, the country of origin where a company is headquartered. But we recognize, of course, that the most scalable cloud technologies, they are provided nowadays through multi-cloud partnerships that also rely on EU expertise, partners that are headquartered in the EU. In these partnerships, you find contractual arrangements that separate between where data is stored, where data is managed. There are encryption keys being handed out only to those that are allowed to access the data based on customer preferences, and they very often happen to be exclusively in European companies. So there's a lot of division of labor, and I can only want to go to the extreme in the sovereignty debate, starting with the US Cloud Act, law enforcement. There are many companies, including the largest digital companies, cloud services providers, which happen to be headquartered in Germany or in France, but have subsidiaries in the United States, which are by default subject to the US Cloud Act. At the same time, we should not go to the extreme with the sovereignty debate, because there are so many other examples of devices and services that are exported from the EU to other jurisdictions in the domain of connected devices, connected cars, where the same logic about, let's say, operational resilience or the kill switch actually applies. And I think that going to the extreme in the sovereignty debate in this particular respect will only fire back. I can only repeat that multi-cloud is, first of all, about customer choice, leaving the flexibility to purchase a certain package of cloud services, expand it here and there, say goodbye to certain providers if they do not perform as required any longer. It is providing customer choice to those who know best what their use case is and who should decide what should be purchased. Multi-cloud is about resilience. It is about security. And it's about scalable operations. And I think multi-cloud is actually the best option for most public services agencies, including those in relatively critical or sensitive government use cases, to go ahead with.
Thank you so much, Matthias, and thank you to everyone who has participated in this discussion, which I think has been very, very useful and very, very interesting. Let me, before I close, remind you again of the study itself, which is available in the chat function. You can just click on it there, and you can, of course, access it also on our website. And we're going to have multiple opportunities to come back to the paper itself, because it's very rich, not just in aggregate data, but also in specific examples and use cases, which I think are very informative, and frankly, they are quite encouraging as well. I think takeaway points for me here would be what I gather to be an emerging consensus, not just here, but for many participants in the broad discussions around cloud policy, is to build on different type of regulatory developments to go towards more of a multi-cloud approach. It's central in order to generate the benefits we would like to have from cloud, not just for public services, but also to pick up on Matt's point that we perhaps sometimes exaggerate how far we have come in the private sector as well, on cloud, and of course on different services you want to run on cloud. What I'm also hearing is that it's perfectly possible to find an accommodation which is pragmatic between, on the one hand, a sovereignty approach, and on the other hand, a multi-cloud approach. And even if we move into areas which maybe have sort of higher security concerns associated with them, like, for instance, defense, or what you, Antonio, talked about with the Polish Ministry of Defense and what you're doing on there together with them. It is possible to find a multi-cloud approach even there. So I think that's a couple of encouraging thoughts to build on as the policy debate moves on, and as, of course, the technological reality and innovation also gather speed and generates more and more opportunity. Thank you so much to everyone, to Bo, to Matt, to Matthias, and to Antonio. This has been a very good Friday afternoon to spend, and I hope the rest of you who joined us also thought that. We're also showing this as a video, and it's been running on different platforms as well. So there's going to be plenty of opportunity to share the video of the entire conversation we've had here today as well. And without much further ado, let me thank you all and wish you all a good Friday and a good weekend.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.